What you guys, today we're taking a look at how to fix stuttering and frame drops. This is your FPS frame drops in all games. We're talking about also high CPU usage and high GPU usage, and we're going to be covering all of this in this video. As you can see from this game here, there is that line that's going across the screen there, and you can see it's rather jagged. And this is what's going to cause the odd frame drop and spikes in your gameplay. You're going to get a sudden freeze, and that is what's causing it when you get that little spike there. Why does that happen? Well, most of the time you're going to see a lot of YouTubers recommending old hardware and things like this for gaming. There's big problems with that is you're going to end up with a lot of bottlenecking, high CPU usage, high GPU usage, and a lot of other things with these older systems. And these systems weren't really designed for gaming, but you can game on them, but you're going to run into a few issues along the way. Now, some of these issues are related to the actual CPU itself. It might be an older generation CPU, and you may find the CPU running at 100% when you're gaming. And this is because it just can't keep up with the demand with a modern graphics card that you're putting in there. The RAM can be also an issue. You may be using, low-end RAM, or you might only have one stick in there, which is running on a single channel. The data bus speed on these motherboards are not great, and also having low megahertz and not enough RAM can be an issue. They're not the best. So hardware, old hardware, is a key problem to a lot of these issues that you might be having. Now, again, whether you're buying a low profile system or a larger system, if it's really old, they're okay for someone who's on a really tight budget who wants to get into gaming and don't have the money to go out and buy a bleeding edge system. You can build systems for pretty affordable prices if you know what you're doing, and you can get someone to help you build it. You can buy some pretty cheap AMD systems nowadays, or some cheap AMD parts, even brand new AMD parts. Some of the older generation, you can pick those up pretty cheap, and you can still build yourself a better system than what these Dell Optiplexes can deliver. So before we look at some testing, let's have a look at eBay. You can see here, this one's £259. It's probably a third or second gen processor in here. i7, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 512 gigabytes of SSD, and 1 terabyte hard drive. You have no clue of what the condition of these are like. So you're sort of buying these blind. They have been in an office and they've been kicking around somewhere. Here's an old Dell Optiplex 7010 SFF, which means small form factor, which means you're going to be limited with a power supply in there and other limitations in here because they're proprietary parts. The same thing goes for the graphics card. You probably be able to get away with a 1650 in here, but you will be pushing that power supply a little bit in here. So before you splash your cash, have a look around on the market and see what you can get new or used. You might be able to pick up something like this, a little bundle here, which is on offer. And they're doing offers like these all the time. Now is a really good time to actually build a computer because they're probably offloading a lot of the older generations because there's a new AMD systems coming out. So you might be able to pick up some of these bundles here pretty cheap. Look at this one, £229. And you're getting a little bundle here for a Ryzen 5 3600, a B550 gaming motherboard here as well. And I think what you've got to look at is you can probably find better deals if you look around. But what I'm trying to say to you is there's upgradability on these systems, whereas the Dell Optiplexes, they're pretty much going to be done for in a year or so. So just bear that in mind before you start buying them. Now, the PC that I'm going to show you here with this little small form factor has an i5 3550p in it, and it has 4 cores and 4 threads. So I'm going to show you what the testing's like for this i5 3550p and what it looks like when you're playing games. And it can play games, but you may find some games are going to tax the system a little bit too much. So bear that in mind before you rush out and start spending your hard-earned cash on some of this older hardware. Yes, it can get you out of a jam if someone gives it to you for free, but if you're looking to buy it, they're pretty expensive if you look around in the UK. Let's take a look at this i5 3550p. You can see it's running at 100%. And again, we've got the GTX 1050 Ti in here running at 100%. This is going to cause you major problems when gaming. You're going to end up with stuttering, frame drops, also thermal throttling, and other problems like that. And this is because this game might not be optimized that well for this type of old hardware. Another problem you may fall into here is the fact that you might have to run this at a lower resolution. You might not be able to do 1080p. You might have to do 720p or something like that. And this is the problem with these older systems. You can always lower the graphics settings as well and try and play with a lower graphics. You have to lower the graphics down so you can get smoother gameplay. The system has to work in harmony with each other. So if you're trying to push too much graphics out of your system, the CPU needs to catch up with that. And of course, it's going to raise the CPU up, especially on these older systems. Also, think about putting some more RAM in. Don't use just 4 gigs of RAM. Try and get as much RAM in there as possible. And this will also alleviate a few problems. Try and steer clear of DDR2 systems. DDR3, if you're going down that route, make sure that you get as much memory in there as possible. Check the motherboard manufacturer's website and it will tell you the maximum amount of memory. You want to try and get 16 gigs in there if you can. That will be the better thing you can do. Put the fastest RAM in there as possible that it will accept, and make sure you're running dual channel and not single channel, which means 2 sticks of RAM or more. So I'll show you this in a second. I'm just going to put some more RAM in here. You can see there's some room on here for more RAM. Try and pick up some RAM cheaply if you're running an older system like this. And also get rid of that clunky old hard drive and put in an SSD in here. It doesn't have to be a super high-end SSD. Just get one in there, and this will also alleviate a few problems when booting up and things like that and using the computer in general. So try and make the thing a little bit more pleasurable to work with. And remember, some of these old hard drives here are really slow. They've got very slow speeds on them. So if you're trying to run Windows and gaming on them, that is a big issue as well. So upgrading to an SSD is essential. Another thing I want to point out here is your power supply. The power supply plays a big role in your system. If you've got the stock power supply in here, what's going to happen is the amps on the 12-volt rail are not going to be that high because it's a budget power supply, and normally they're proprietary and they're pretty low wattage, and people tell you to put in big graphics cards in these and stretch it to its maximum. And you can see here on this 12-volt rail we only have 17.8 amps on maximum on the 12-volt rail, which is going to feed your system and your graphics card, and maximum wattage on here is only 250 watts. So you're going to be very, very limited on these small form factors. So bear that in mind. So a lot of people tend to forget about talking about the capability of your power supply. It can get hot and it can catch fire if you push it beyond its capabilities. And this can also cause micro stutters where there's not enough power to feed your GPU. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the issue in hand and see how we can resolve these micro stutters by capping our frame rates. Now, of course, the more you tax the GPU, the CPU is going to have to work harder as well. So bear that in mind. You can see there's a jerky, jiggery line there going up and down, and it spikes now and again. What you need to do is download MSI Afterburner and get that installed. And once you get that installed, you'll see frame rate limiter here. You can just limit the frame rate. So I was running at around about 120-ish frames, so I'm going to cap this at about 90. And then we can do it for this actual game. So we can do it for individual games, set our own frame rate individually for games. And you can do this in games sometimes, but it's not advisable because that is not the best way of capping your frame rate. But what we'll do is we'll go in here and we're just going to select this one here. And basically, once you select this, we can click OK, select that, and I'll show you what it looks like once we've selected the 90 FPS. People are obsessed with FPS and they want to get as much as possible, and they leave it uncapped, and this is when you're going to end up with issues. So we're back in the game now, right exactly where we was before, and you can see that line is already nice and smooth and straight, and you can tweak this even further by messing around with the graphics. If you've got an older system, this is a pretty new system, so it's running pretty sweet and nice and smooth. But if you have got an older system, you may want to tweak it a bit further, play around with your graphics settings, lower some of the graphics settings so it's not taxing the GPU as much. And the more you mess around with it, you can actually get a pretty smooth experience. I'm only just capped this and it's actually running a lot smoother. Now, a lot of people promote 2K and 4K gaming online nowadays, saying that's the new standard. But I still think 1080p is still very enjoyable, and you can still play games at 1080p and get very good frame rates. And you can also get a lower end graphics card and play games at higher frame rates with 1080p. But once you get up to them higher end monitors with 4K and 2K with higher refresh rates, you're going to need a graphics card to drive that monitor. And I see a lot of people falling into that trap, and then they end up where they can't get good frame rates because their graphics card is not powerful enough to drive the monitor they've got. So they end up downscaling the resolution down to 1080p, and it just looks absolute horrible. So don't do that. Stick with a 1080p if that's your price point. Again, go into your settings. You can change a lot of this stuff. You can see this set to ultra, and of course this is going to impact your FPS. But I think for games like this, it's not so important to have super high FPS because it's not a first-person shooter. It's basically just a game that you want to get the best out of, like The Witcher and things like that. I try to play it at a higher resolution. As long as there's no jerkiness, then I don't mind. But you can, on a lower end system, lower the settings down. It normally does this automatically. It will normally tell what graphics card you got in the system and what your hardware is, and try to set it at those rates. But you can always go in and trim it a little bit more to make sure you have a much more enjoyable experience. The whole idea is to cap your FPS, to stop it running at its maximum speed. And of course, when you're doing this, the CPU needs to keep up, and this is going to max out your CPU. And it will start pushing your CPU up higher and higher, and you're going to end up with either a maximum GPU or maximum CPU speeds. And sometimes your RAM can run at maximum as well. And especially on older systems, this is pretty common. So try to cap it and bring those settings down to a more reasonable setting. So if you're looking to get really smooth gameplay, then consider messing around with the graphics settings, lowering them down a little bit, turn off shadows maybe, because that can eat up a lot of GPU. And then try to get that GPU down so it's not running at 100%. And once you've done that, you'll probably notice the CPU will actually drop down, and that will make the game a lot smoother, and it won't be as bad when you're playing. You won't get those micro freezes and stuttering and things like that when you're playing games. And try to keep that line as smooth and straight as possible. So capping your frame rate is a really good way of doing this. And I've been doing this for many, many years, playing games, and I've had no issues at all. Now, I know it's more challenging with an older system, but I'll try and get an older system, and I'll show you how to do it on an older system to try and bring that CPU and GPU down so you're not taxing the system as much. Anyway, I hope this video helps out. My name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. Just want to say a quick shout out to all my YouTube members. I appreciate the support, and I shall catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.